Welcome to War Movie Theatre, where we need war films like the infantry needs alcohol. Today we're greasing up our torpedoes and setting out into the Atlantic as we watch probably the best submarine movie ever made. That's right, it's Das Boot. I'm Rob Hutton, and I'm taking this podcast out to hunt for Allied convoys. Foisted on me at the last minute is a young man from a distant part of the world. He says he's my new first officer, but I'm worried he's going to spend his evenings writing a manual on how to be a good Nazi. Also climbing aboard is a keen war correspondent who says he wants to see some action firsthand. Will he regret that choice before we get to Gibraltar? It's BBC Diplomatic Correspondent James Landale. Hello, James.
Hello, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
Actually, I didn't say hello, Duncan, did I?
No, you didn't. It's fine. You're just gratuitously offensive. I think we should just leave it. You know, move on.
Well, no,
I'm
but
used to it
Hello,
by now.
Duncan.
Hello, Rob.
Hello, Duncan.
it's like that old joke about economics correspondents who begin every conversation by saying, well, assume this. Just, assume there's inflation like this, or assume that, unemployment is this, and then we go on. So Duncan has just been assumed.
I'm assuming a Duncan Weldon. Yes.
Petrus Caribus Duncan will be here.
Hello, Duncan Weldon.
Hello, Rob.
James, you picked this film. Why did you pick Das Boot?
Well, first of all, I think there was something slightly remiss. You hadn't really done a proper submarine film so far. I mean, obviously, you've done The Cruel Sea. You're done In Which We Serve. And I suppose part of my sort of, instinctive BBC balance now felt that we ought to do the other side of the story too. So sort of under the water as well as on top. Secondly, I have a family connection, like so many other people, to submarines. And
yes.
I had a great uncle who served on a British E-boat in the Baltic, sent there by Churchill during the First World War, to interdict the flow of Swedish iron ore to fuel the German war machine. And he went out on patrol from a place called Reval, which is what we call Tallinn in those days, in 1916, and he never came home. Ooh. And his disappearance was a sort of family mystery for years and years and years, until about 15 years ago, an Australian Qantas engineer who was a descendant of the last survivor, because his ancestor was ill and so didn't go on that patrol. Taught himself Russian and German, went through all the old documentation and worked out and said, right, I think that this E18 is here. And they got us one of those ROVs down there, and they found it on the second day of searching. And they discovered it almost perfectly intact on the bottom with a big hole in its bow. It had clearly been steaming on the surface and had hit a mine and gone down. Anyway, so there's a lovely sort of story about it. And my great uncle was given a gong posthumously by the Tsar for services to Russia. So I've always had that. And I spent a certain amount of time at sea myself. So I have a very, very small inkling of what it's like to be crammed onto a small vessel in the middle of the ocean. And I've always been in awe and curious about people who are willing to do it, for much longer in dangerous conditions under the water. So I've always been fascinated by the whole submarine thing. You,
in fact, have sailed around the world, I think.
Yeah. No, I did one of those sort of round the world yacht races many, many years ago. So we had 13, 14 people crammed into a 60-foot yacht, going at pace with no frills, because you're racing, you're not cruising. So I've got a vague idea of what it's like to work around the clock and be full of people who are smelly and sweaty and haven't sort of, washed for a while and things like that. But what I don't have is a sense of, I'm not comparing that to being in a submarine.
No, because the smell is one of the fascinating things about this film, because you can't smell anything on film, but they do quite a good job of making you feel like maybe you have some idea that it really stinks.
Well, they tell you about it as well.
Yes.
I mean, and there's that fantastic bit when the and I don't know, because we haven't had the conversation about the different versions, but there's a version where you see the correspondent, the lieutenant who's been sent on there as the journalist to sort of write a story about it. You see his notebook. Now, in some versions, his notes are in German. Sometimes they're in English. But in one version, you actually see him. You know, there's a bit, and you can see it. And anyway, I pressed pause and sort of wrote it down because it was so good. And he actually says, and I'm you know, I don't know quite whether this is whether I can actually say this. Is this a family podcast?
I have a way of.
You have a way of dealing with it. But he says this. He writes in his diary: brains numb, limbs leaden, eyes about to implode. We stood watch, chowed down, crapped, and smelt each other's farts, even our own. What a house! you know, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
you know this. You know what it's like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about versions at this point, because this is when I both of you will be aware.
I should let listeners know I got a slightly panicked message from Rob yesterday saying, "How long was the version you watched?"
Because when lots of our listeners have asked us to do this one, I'm very happy when James said he wanted to do it. And I partly because I thought I have this one on DVD because one of the things I do is raid charity shops.
Does it fit on one DVD, the version you have, or is it a 2-disc?
Well, I went downstairs yesterday morning very early, and I thought I shall watch this because my family will not watch this with me in the evening. Cause I sort of thought it's about 3.5 hours. I'd seen 3.5 hours, and I opened the DVD, and it was 2 discs, and it said 5 hours. I thought, ooh! I thought 5 hours is quite a long time to spend on this, and I've got other things to do today. And so I sent panic messages to both of you saying what version. And then I started researching, and I can now give you the definitive answer to the versions of Das Boot. It is released first in 1981 as a 149-minute film. Then in 1984, it's broadcast on the BBC as 6 50-minute TV episodes. And this is the first thing that has always slightly confused me about it, because I've always thought, hang on, is Das Boot a movie or is it a TV series? Because I've had in my mind the idea that it was a TV series, and I can't imagine I would have watched it in 1984, but I know I did watch several bits of it when it was rebroadcast in 1999 at Christmas. It was broadcast. Listeners in West Germany, we have some. Hello, Germany, as we now call it. This wasn't broadcast in East Germany. It's broadcast as 3 100-minute episodes in 1985 in West Germany. And then it's released in a 208-minute director's cut in 1997. And there is also downstairs, and I know that it exists because I have it, but it's not quite. It doesn't make it onto the Wikipedia page. There is what's called the complete film, which is just all of the TV episodes, I think, run together, and that is a 5-hour film across 2 discs. And I mean, lots of people say that's the version to watch, and I might one day, but that wasn't the version I was going to watch.
I was at 3.5 hours for my watch.
Yeah, I think
which felt long enough. I'm going to be honest.
3.5 hours is the right one. And that's the one that you can easily rent now. But James, who is nothing if not thorough, I think you've watched both the 2.5 hour and the 3.5 hour one. Is that?
Yeah, I watched the 2.5 hour one and the 3.5 hour one because I didn't know I just kind of went for the first one I found, and then kind of realized, because as I was watching it, sort of even to my untutored eye, I could tell the cuts were a bit dodgy, and there were clearly bits cut out. There was the most substantive bit cut out was right at the beginning, when you see the captain and some of the officers are in a car heading to the party, and they come across these sailors who are clearly drunk and enjoying themselves. That scene goes entirely, so you don't see that at all. Mm-hmm. You just go straight into the party, and also the end is curiously curtailed, as in it I mean the ending of the film, we can get to it, and I don't know how much we need to have the spoiler, but the ending, which is a very distinct sort of scene, comes as quite abruptly.
Yes.
And it's even more abrupt in the 2.5 hour thing. So in other words, the rest of it, essentially he took out a chunk at the beginning and at the end, and then sort of salami sliced everything else. And it just, sometimes you can see the stitching. And so I think the 3.5 hours actually breathes properly as a piece of cinema.
Yes. Well, we will circle back on this. So the film is based on a 1973 semi-autobiographical novel by Lothar Günther Buchheim. I think that's how I'm going to pronounce it, which is a sort of instant bestseller in Germany. Right, now, first fun fact. Do you know who was originally slated to star as the captain?
No.
Robert Redford.
Oh.
I don't. This is first of all, this is an American in production. This is an American film.
I was going to say, has Robert Redford's German was going to be my next.
Well,
Tifa, not
right.
Tifa.
So and they tried. They're going to have Redford, and then if you can't, if you think sort of mid-late 70s, if you can't get Robert Redford, who do you go for next? Paul Newman. So he's attached to it, and there's a load of American directors. I think Don Siegel's attached to it at one point, and none of them can work out how to make it. Is the basic problem because the ship stuff is going to be so, all of the water scenes are going to be so difficult. And actually, apparently, the scene that defeats all the directors as they're trying to think about it is the bit where the two submarines meet in the middle of a storm. And they're just, I don't know how I don't know why that. I mean, I would have just said, like, how essential is that to the plot? Can we just cut that? But anyway, that's the thing. And then it becomes a German production, and Wolfgang Petersen, who's a sort of up and coming director at that point, is given the job of it. He writes an adaptation. It becomes the most expensive German film ever made. Certainly at the time. It takes them 2 years. Petersen writes the script, falls out with Buchheim. Buchheim seems to fall out with everyone. And he doesn't like, he didn't like the film, though it may be that he didn't like the 1981 film. He said it was a cheap American action flick and it had destroyed all of the anti-war messaging. And not sure I'm with you all the way there, Lothar Günther, to be honest. It's the most amazing production. So what do you guys know about how they film this thing?
I've no idea, actually. I've not looked into.
Well, they sort of clearly had a mock-up of inside.
They have a full-size model of the entire submarine, which they put on a hydraulic gimbal thing so that they can shake it around. There's no, normally you imagine normally a film set, you've got Jerry Seinfeld's living room and it's got 3 walls but not the 4th wall. There's nothing like that. So if you want to film it, you have to get into the submarine, which enables them to create this incredibly sort of claustrophobic atmosphere. But it's a complete mock-up. And so
early 1980s TV cameras and booms and all of that, they're not little. They're not little things like now. That's going to be quite a lot of kit to be moving around narrow corridors.
And so it is recorded silent because what they build a film camera and even a Steadicam gimbal, which has then been invented, is too big. So they build a smaller. There's several things that are built for this film. They build a smaller camera thing that enables the director of photography to film cinefilm on it. For people who are interested in this, he wrote the most amazing article where he gets into which film stock he used and this kind of thing. All the lighting that's in there is authentic. So they don't bring lights in with them, but the gyroscopes on his camera are so noisy that they wouldn't be able to pick up sound anyway. And also, there is no room for a sound engineer. But what this means you can do after he's been in this sub for a couple of weeks, he gets to know it so well that the way that they do that shot, that amazing shot where everyone charges down the length of the submarine to trim it, they do that with him running down the length of the submarine. That's how did you make that? Well, what I did was I held the camera and I just ran. And I think he did injure himself a few times doing this. But so it is. I mean, it's at a technical level. This film is fascinating. The actors, they get actors from across Germany because Petersen wants people to look and sound different. And they are all under contract not to let the sun touch their skin for a year. So they all have to wear sun cream. and they're not allowed to. They're not. It's got quite. They're not allowed to shave. They do it. I mean, I'm sorry, I went such a rabbit hole in this. They film it in 3 chunks, and
well, there's sort of a designated level of unshaving for each chunk.
Right, right. So if you think of it as being, however many chapters, they film chapter 1, chapter 4, chapter 7, chapter 10, sort of in sequence with people's hair growing, and then everybody's allowed to shave, and then they film chapter 2, chapter 4, and so on, and then everybody's allowed to, so they do it in three lots like that. But the reason that all these guys look so pallid is because they haven't, their skin has not seen the sun for a year, and and it's not within the submarine they allow all of the food to rot. So although there is no smell-o-vision, the actors can absolutely smell, and the crew can absolutely smell how much this stuff stinks. As the
this
film
sounds like the most unpleasant production to work on for 2 years.
Oh, I will. What I might do is I might save parts of the unpleasantness. But the other interesting thing is, because they're not recording sound, and because he's got all the actors he recruits are bilingual, so everybody's dubbing their sound, and everybody just does 2 dubs. They do they do a German dub and an English dub, which is why. Now, in fact, so an English dubbed version is released, and very unusually, the German dubbed version did better in America than the English one. I do slightly wonder whether one of the TV versions I saw might have been the English dub. I'm not. I sort of have a memory of having seen it, but the sort of the. I mean, I thought at one point yesterday, because I was streaming it off Amazon, I thought maybe this has got the English dub and it hasn't. Because I would have liked to have seen that, but so they've now sort of consigned that slightly to history. But it's there's so much amazing stuff about how they make it. It goes down a bomb with the critics. Roger Ebert says, if it were an American submarine, we would assume the film ends in victory, identify with the crew, and cheer them on. By making it a German boat, the filmmakers neatly remove the patriotic element and increase the suspense. We identify not with the mission, but with the job. It's nominated for 6 Oscars in a really tough year. So also, it doesn't win any, and it's up against E.T., Gandhi, The Verdict, Missing, Sophie's Choice, and Tootsie. I mean, that's just...
It's tough, yeah.
That's not a year you want to be in. No. Mainly, it loses out to E.T. and Gandhi. And I actually... Do you know what? I haven't watched either of those probably since they came out, and whereas this, I think stands up better. But we haven't done a film from the German side yet, have we, Duncan?
No, I don't think we have. I don't think we have. I think this might be a first. And it's a shame. So, I watched with the English subtitles. My German is very, very, very poor. I don't have the ear for it, which is a shame because, as I understand it, and I just don't pick up on this, but as I understand it, lots of the characters have quite strong, different regional German accents. Vienna, Hamburg, Munich, Berlin, whatever, which I think would add to my enjoyment if I was aware of it. I'm sort of imagining if this is a British submarine and we've got Brummies and Geordies and Scouse voices, and what that adds to the character.
Yes, yeah. There's a whole load of stuff that we're definitely not picking up on. It's hugely successful. It's really interesting that the Germans make it in a way, and I'm glad that the Germans made it rather than Don Siegel and Robert Redford. Love them both, though I do.
Because it's. You can tell it's at that time where there are script lines in it that are clearly designed to signal what Petersen wants to say. Goering is described as a fat slob, and at the party there's quite a lot of anti Hitler sentiment with the drunken other captain. Thompson is clearly mocking what do you call, this vegetarian trainee painter from Vienna who has suddenly become this world master strategist. Do you know what I mean? He sails quite close to the edge, and so it's clearly a German filmmaker making a German point in the early 80s that he wanted to
Yeah, I mean it's 35 years after the film, after the war has ended, so sort of the people who fought the war are now in their 50s. I guess you're at a point where you can start to sort of engage with it all a bit more.
Well, I mean, what I find interesting is, the German TV series Generation War, which was 2012, 2013, sort of 3 or 4 1-hour episode long things. I watched that at the time, when it was shown in Britain on streaming. And as I understand it, that was a very controversial series to be shown on German television when it was made, because it's very much the message of it is lots of Germans suffered in the war as well, and this was seen as quite a controversial thing to put on German television just over a decade ago. So I think it's quite interesting this was made in the early 80s, because the message is this war's not fun for these guys, and they don't want to be there either for lots of them. But that's 30 years before Generation War.
Yeah, I mean, it's really one of the interesting things I was thinking about this was the fact that one of the tests of this is do you identify with the crew, and we'll come on to the convoy battle, but do you when the crew hit a tanker, do you go, yeah, we finally got one home, lads, because, and I don't know quite do, but the ebook point that you identify the job, that these are a bunch of people doing a job, and that they might not have necessarily chosen to be there. This is the job they've got to do. I mean, there is, well, we'll talk about the Nazis and so on, but I mean, there's a slight danger in this. You sort of say, well, it's weird how Hitler rose to power because no one seems to have supported him, and I'm aware that never
also it opens in
this kind of thing, but
it opens in October 41, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, the war is going quite well from the German point of view. The invasion of Russia is still going well. They're still on track to take Moscow. They're not yet at war with the United States. They're doing quite well in North Africa. I would question quite how much anti-Hitler attitude there was in October 41. If once you get to October 43, 44, we're in a very different world. But at this point, things seem to be going still quite well.
The submarine war is between its two happy times. There's the first happy time is sort of 40 to early 41, I think, which basically when the Allied shipping is a complete mess, and it's very much a happy time for U-boat captains rather than for tanker captains. And then there's another one. It's 42, isn't it? But so it's sort of plausible that this sort of might have been at a point where U-boat captains were not feeling as happy as they had 6 months earlier. But I mean, and we should say that Buchheim, who wrote this, he's the Werner character, basically. He was a journalist who went on a mission on U-96 I guess around this time. But on the other hand, memory does play tricks with you, and when you're sitting in the late 60s to write your memoir, inevitably you're refracting it through the lens of what happened afterwards and what you remember. And I mean, yeah, well, we'll circle around this subject, I think. Let's go to the after action report. Quick, Dad, they're on the cable car. What's the moment you want to be called in? I think the first shout of alarm for me is sort of, it's like, oh, right, yeah. I can slightly... I mean, the brothel is interesting in a kind of character establishing sort of way, but if I turned on and I'd missed it, I'd think, that's fine. All the good stuff is at sea, broadly my view. It's a funny one to pick bits from, in a way.
It is. I mean, on the one hand, right, we've just done Master and Commander, which opens with 1815, the Oceans or Battlefields. I think the only sort of opening credits which can capture my attention in a similar way is La Rochelle, France, autumn 1941. So I arguably want to be here from the very beginning. But you're right, it's not a film. Look, it's 3.5 hours, the version I've seen a few times, and it's not a film where you want to watch individual scenes. It's about that atmosphere. It's about the claustrophobia. It's about getting to know these characters and the build-up. So as much as it's a big commitment, I think you want to sit down and sit for it, which is, something which has entered into popular culture. I was thinking this morning, there is an episode of, from what must be 20 years ago, there is an episode of Peep Show in which Mark Corrigan, as you can imagine, is a Das Boot fan.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful episode when he goes on a sort of date with Sophie and he's brought along Das Boot on DVD for them to watch. She says, after an hour and a half, how long is left in this film? So yeah, I'm afraid I would Mark Corrigan this one. It's 3.5 hours and it's worth it.
Yeah, yes. I think you're right. I mean, because if you think about it, this is essentially a film largely made up of close-ups of men's faces looking at the ceiling. That primarily is that's most of the action. And to choose, I mean, I suppose I would probably say the first depth charge attack rather than the first alarm, because the first alarm is a sort of test.
Is a drill. Yes.
Is a drill. Yeah. I think the first sort of actual, depth charge attack, and you actually see the reality of what it's like to be down there and have these things and not know what's going to happen next. So I think that's probably. But you're right. There is no real cable car moment because it's not about cable cars.
Yeah, I mean the sort of the convoy attack is and. The convoy attack sequence and then the evasion from that it's amazing how it switches. And the thing I kept thinking was, I'm so used to thinking of the sort of the Battle of the Atlantic as being that the subs had the advantage because you've got all of these ships, that have very little protection. The Navy is overstretched. I see it as it were from the British perspective. That a torpedo could hit you at any moment. Whereas what's really interesting is that if you're in the U-boats, that's not how it feels at all. Yeah. You're panicking that at any moment a destroyer is going to bear down on you and chuck 20 depth charges.
And the casualties in the German U-boat service over the war are horrific. It's like 75% or something over the course of the war.
Yeah.
And casualties are obviously mostly killed. Rather than injured in this case.
So it sort of it flips back and forth on that one. I mean, the other thing I thought about this is there's a weird, and it's partly to do with its nature that it was filmed because of the financing of it. It was the reason why it's released as it is because I guess the BBC must have had a slice of it or something, and they wanted a TV series, so. It's filmed sort of as a TV series and sort of as a film, and so you could. I mean, actually, the German release of it, where it's 300-minute episodes, there are sort of 3 films here. There's sort of there's, and I couldn't quite disentangle them, but there's sort of the convoy attack is an excellent film on its own, and you could imagine sort of just cutting out extraneous stuff and just doing that, and then the sort of the being stuck on the bottom scene. That's it. That there are films about a submarine stuck on the bottom, and that's the whole film.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, it sort of, and there's so many nice bits. The bit where Johann loses it and the captain is ready to shoot him, and is just so sad. Why you, Johann? I found myself wondering how the Germans cope with combat stress, and probably not terribly, probably not terribly sympathetically, and this fact that at any moment. Something is just a moment that breaks someone, and then Johann sort of, when they're on the bottom, Johann's quite functional and fine, but it's just there's something about the sort of when they're being depth charged after the convoy that breaks him. but yeah, no,
But it's done quite sympathetically because the captain, just teases at him that, it sort of says, okay, how many patrols have you been on? He says, this is your ninth. And so that, there's a suggestion there that sort of, okay, we understand that, there's a reason why, you suddenly lost it because as we now know with PTSD, it's a build up until the moment when, the water just goes over the side of the cup, and then there's this, it gets, serious. And I think that's what happened with him there.
And then, all of the being trapped on the bottom is amazing. I mean, and again, if I'd missed everything else, I would still just sit there for the being trapped on the bottom.
But you're right. That's almost a movie in of itself. I mean, you could make a perfectly good 90-minute movie about a submarine trapped on the bottom.
Yeah, and it works better because all of these guys. So you've seen that you've seen Johann's fragility, and now you're seeing him sort of redeem himself. I'm
now very up for the idea of watching the sort of 5-hour version as 5 episodes. I can imagine this working really well as 60 minutes, or see it as a mini-series sort of thing.
Yeah, see if Mrs. Duncan goes for that. And when they finally do that, there's so many lovely moments. So when they finally do it, and they open the hatch and they're all just gasping for air, and you suddenly that's the sort of when they other horror stories about how they're filming it. The way that they filmed the sub sort of being tilted and filling up with water was they took their model and they tilted it and they dumped it in a big tank of water. And the way that they filmed emptying the water from the thing, the bucket chain moment, there was no other way to empty this sub except for the actors to run a bucket chain up. So Wolfgang Petersen had the way that he got these guys looking exhausted and ready to die, sort of carrying this bucket chain up the sub was he he made them do it.
Do you think actors would have agreed to that? It would be in their contract these days.
Yeah, well, I mean, these guys agreed to wear sun cream every time they went outdoors for a year. So, I mean, it's the method, isn't it? You can sort of see Daniel Day-Lewis, but they're all. I mean, all of these they're also all unknowns, and they're all kids. So that's the other thing is he wanted sort of 19, 20-year-olds, and so you can sort of see, one of the things is you can sort of see with their facial hair that although they're not shaving, some of them are also not really growing beards, or they're growing sort of scrappy beards in the way that you do when you're 19. It's and then the one scene of this that I absolutely remembered that I knew I'd seen, because I think I've seen bits of this over the years, but I wasn't sure if I'd seen the whole thing, was the homecoming, because I vividly remember the captain's face as he watches the submarine sink. And that just stuck in my mind. That has stuck in my mind for 30 odd years. This look of, I've got you, I've done it. I got you back. I got everyone home. No one thought I could do it. We all thought we were dead. And now the bastards have just come and bombed us, and I'd actually, I don't think I'd quite appreciated. I'd forgotten that he then dies. I just remember his face and I remember the submarine dying, as it were, but not him. I guess, and this goes back to the sort of refractive lens thing. This film sort of has to end in defeat, because if you're a German making a German film about the German war, fundamentally the German war ends in defeat. And whereas, we have all of these British films that we love about, well, it's sort of a defeat, but in a way, there's a way in which this defeat here at Dunkirk or at Arnhem or whatever is sort of setting us up for ultimately we are going to win this. There's a different tone. Whereas the final scene of this is just, oh, well, no, you've lost. It's over. In fact, they're all dead.
Well, I guess nobody in German cinema sort of, in the last 40, 50 years has felt the need to make, a triumphant movie about the Battle of France, which ends with the German army marching through Paris. End of film. I mean, it'd be a tough one to pitch, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, well, the other film that everyone keeps asking us to do, and I promise we will get to it, is Cross of Iron, which is about retreating. I mean that's another German film, and that's about losing basically. But
The thing is, I think that although it ends in defeat, I think the film is astonishingly English for a German film, because there is so much restrained emotion in so many of the lines. I mean, some of the lines the captain sort of says, you can imagine, Noel Coward saying. When Johann finally comes in and redeems himself and comes in, permission to report to the captain, I've stopped the no more leaks. Right. So, this is on this one fact, the entire boat's future depends.
Yeah.
And the captain goes, very good, Johann. Very good. Do you know what I mean? It's like kind of,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's that incredible self-restraint that I think gives the film so much of its drive, is the fact that, yes, every so often people go slightly sort of doolally, but in between it, the self-control is amazing.
Yes, you're right. Well, maybe the Germans really are our cousins. Because it's sort of there's all of my memes and so on, actually looking at them, were versions of Jürgen. A lot of them were Jürgen Prochnow, sort of who plays the captain, saying something that really understates how terrible everything is. That's sort of and. You're right. Yes, that's a good point. I hadn't thought it. But you could sort of, and in a weird way, I mean, I think this is the best submarine film. Hunt for Red October would be my other entry, but I suspect that I can't imagine the makers of Hunt for Red October didn't spend a long time watching the 5-hour version of this and thinking how.
And no one was making Sean Connery stay away from the sun for 2 years or carry buckets of water up.
Yeah, it really does sort of, it does. You do identify with these people. Actually, it's funny, don't you? Despite the fact that sort of watching this, my basic identification ought to be with the convoy captains and the destroyer captains and so on. But ultimately you're completely sold on the crew.
Yeah.
She's not so dumb. Are there women in this film? I mean, yes, but I do feel the line that Werner gets towards the end, "No woman crosses our path," is a more accurate summation. I mean, the interesting women are all women you don't see. So the wives and the girlfriends. Anyway, I would say there is a brothel though. But the young ensign's girlfriend, who we only see a photograph of, and the chief's wife, and so on. I think those are the ones that I find myself sort of curious about.
But I think their existence is significant to the plot. Even though we don't actually see them as characters, they are clearly characters in the story. In terms of just the fact that Ullman's got a French girlfriend and she's pregnant, and the consequences of that if the partisans find her. Do you know what I mean? It just shows the reality of kind of, okay, so there were there were relationships between the French and the German. So to a certain extent, the other thing, of course, is that, I mean, if we're on the subject, I mean, there's a huge amount of sex in this film. I mean, it in terms of that you've got a bunch of very, very horny young men trapped into a small boat, and the references they make to sex are constant. And there's even a reference, sort of an explicit reference to it when the entire crew is checked for crabs, and have to drop their pants for the boat's medic. And every how can I put it? There's descriptions of difficult navigation. Are compared to the tightness of certain parts of the anatomy frequently.
Not in all of the edits. There was one where I saw a great quote was saying it's like passing through the eye of a needle, and I thought that's not what it was. That's what it said in my version.
But there's I mean, the Vaseline makes a surprising entrance into, not least because they are smothering the torpedoes in Vaseline, so that they slide in and out, but other aspects to it. So, and there's a constant sort of reference to the reality of young men unable to engage with women, on a boat. But you're right. Ultimately, the key of the female characters are clearly the vicarious characters off screen.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't. I did find myself worrying about the ensign's girlfriend. When the film was over, I thought, well, she's in trouble now, but yeah, no, you're right. That's a good way of putting it. The casualty, delicately. see why you're at the BBC.
A diplomatic correspondent, no less.
The casualty list, the movie body count, is complicated, I would say. And in fact, it's interesting that no one seems to have attempted it online for some reason. So I'll take guesses at this point. It depends how you want to count, I think.
It does, doesn't it? It does. So for a 3.5-hour film, not hugely high in terms of.
Well, the tanker crew. A tanker crew would have been around 350, but we don't really see them. And there's another ship they sink, and so okay, maybe do we count those? I can't decide. I think the interesting question is what happens to the crew of the sub, because I think you see 5 of them die, but I sort of concluded that we're supposed to think that they've all been killed, except for Werner and the navigator whose ambulance probably got off before the bombers came in. I sort of think the point is supposed to be.
Is that right? Because you see the chief engineer, he's still alive.
Is he?
Yeah, because there are a whole load of them who actually get under the cover.
Oh right.
Underneath the roof, and there are some of them there who are clearly injured and may potentially die. But you see some of them that are still living at that point, and the chief engineer is sitting up, looking around him, sort of moving his hair around, right, dust out of his face.
Okay,
so I don't think they're all dead, but I think a large number.
Yeah.
So I suppose we're talking what, 30?
The total crew is 50.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know. Yeah, no, as I say, I think you see about 5 of them dying, but I'd sort of assumed that I couldn't quite decide what the implication was. It's sort of it's a bit complicated, that one. I mean, interestingly, I believe that the real U-96 never lost a crew member all the way through. One of the interesting things about the internet is you can
track
get the complete mission reports. Yeah. There is no shortage of U-boat information, and U-96 was a real boat and did have the swordfish logo on the side, and the captain of it, the captain that this captain is based on, gets promoted out of boats at some point in the next year, which is why he survives the war and is available to be a consultant on the film, because you sort of suspect that once you get to about 1943, all the experienced captains are getting killed quite quickly if they're still out there. But I don't think that U-96 ever lost anyone, although U-96 was sunk by bombers in 1945 in the submarine pens. But I think by that stage she had been retired. So
I looked up La Rochelle this morning. Actually, it's one of those. La Rochelle is liberated 8th of May 1945. It's one of the so-called Festungs that they're ordered to hold to sort of the last man, and they do. And the Allies sort of say, well, we're just not going to bother with that then. Sort of blockade them off, like the Channel Islands, so yeah, La Rochelle right there till the end as a German held base.
But presumably not sending U-boats out at that point.
No, not by that point. No fuel, no. But presumably some trapped submariners who couldn't get out.
Yeah, I don't. But though the real captain I think he's moved on to Norway or something. I mean, he does make it through. Cooler King Award. There are no gratuitous American characters. America isn't even in the war at this point. I mean, unless the sailors on the tanker, conceivably.
We
But
would have had lots of nominations if Robert Redford had indeed starred.
it just would have been, I mean, he's great, and I can imagine him in that role. But can you imagine him giving the order to back the U-boat off as men are drowning in the water? I don't think that Robert Redford would have allowed himself to be filmed doing that. I think he's a fine actor, but I think he also understands, that people need to like him. And maybe I'm being unfair on him, but I think you have a big American star, and the character of the film changes somehow. I mean, James Mason is in Cross of Iron, so maybe, but I have to go back and see how that compares. But I think this works much, much better without the Americans. Which brings us to, and introducing, there are all the people who are in this, basically, with a couple of exceptions. You go through their IMDb thing, this is what they're known for. They're all, a couple of them sort of go on to acting careers in Germany, I think, but most of them, this is, in fact, most of them on their IMDb, the photo of them is a photo from this film, which really tells you they don't do anything else, which is fine. I mean, I thought maybe you spend a year with Wolfgang Petersen with your underwater, and you decide that your dad was right about accountancy being a better profession. But Jürgen Prochnow, who is, I mean, Germans would dispute that he had been introduced in this. He's got a solid career, but this moves him to sort of to Hollywood sort of C-list status, and he goes on. He's the dad in June. The Duke Atreides is probably his biggest role after this. But the real person who is introduced to Hollywood from this is Wolfgang Petersen. The director, who goes on to make In the Line of Fire, Air Force One, Outbreak, Troy. I mean, died a couple of years ago, but this is sort of, people see this and they say, yes, let's get him in. Yeah. James,
I got one addition, which it might not pass your test for this.
Yeah.
But I would argue the boat itself is introduced.
I thought you might have this one I've got this in one or two countries.
This is a film called Das Boot. It is about the boat, the ship. Yeah. Sorry, the boat. It's not a ship. The opening shot is of it. The last shot is of it, and what I hadn't realised was that it's the exterior model was also used for the making of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And there's a story around this, which I don't. Rob, did you?
No, you go. You go. I mean, I think our research has done on criminal life.
Well, I read this a little bit on Wikipedia somewhere. But what I hadn't realised is that the crew came down to do that day's shooting on Das Boot, and you discovered that the exterior model of their U-boat had disappeared, and nobody had told them that it had been leased to Steven Spielberg, who was making Raiders of the Lost Ark, who also filmed similar stuff at La Rochelle in the same place. So that scene in Raiders is the similar sort of place. Yeah. So Das Boot had to sort of stop for a week, and while Steven Spielberg did his thing.
It's lucky the actors didn't get to chat to each other from the two productions. What are you going to do with your time off, or stay out of the sun? Really, what, you guys are allowed out in the sun?
Yeah, so the famous Raiders scene where you see Indy at sea on, sort of standing on top of the submarine trying to work out what he's going to do next. That is the Das Boot submarine. Which again, it would have been, realistically, would they have made this model just for Raiders of the Lost Ark? Probably not. But as it was there, so this is the second full size model. It's only sort of authentic above the water, and there are half size ones and so on for a lot of the at sea shots. They sort of they take it to various places and they try and get it. They said that when they were trying for the roughest seas they could get, so the fishermen would be coming in saying it's too rough, and they'd be saying, right, let's go out. But again, all of this is so difficult because, it's quite hard to imagine now in an age of sort of GoPros and, I couldn't say my phone is a waterproof high definition camera. They're doing this with film cameras that are large and bulky and not waterproof, and an awful lot of the technical challenges of this film, which is why I think it's really harsh that E.T. won the special effects award. Actually, I think this was harder. Yes, yeah, okay. Well, and the submarine then. That he's bought it, Sarge. Best death.
No contest.
It's a submarine again, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was.
I suppose the captain is a good honourable runner-up. Simply because he's just that look, as you said earlier, that look on his face as he's seeing his boat sink, and almost that sense that he can only die when the boat dies, and that you see the conning tower go down, and that's sort of okay, right, I can lie down. He just slides off.
Yes.
Because his purpose is over. There's no point to him anymore. But yeah, it is the boat.
Good luck. The best meme. As I say, I've got an awful lot of quotes from Jürgen Prochnow, but I like the second officer doing the tablecloth trick, or failing to do the tablecloth trick. I'll have your nominations. Come on, what have you got?
Well, I still like the alarm. I still like just somebody shouting alarm, because that's just that look of and what it means. I also like. There's that bit when part of the, there are various scenes where they're on the surface and they're steaming they're going really hard at it through the sea, and there's utter exhilaration on their faces. Now that I can totally understand and exhilarate. I've been in conditions like that when you're really pumping a boat hard and there's water everywhere and it's just pure joy, exhilaration. You're just and there's a brilliant bit towards the end when they're on their return, when the captain goes slightly sort of mad. They didn't get us. They're all in their beds. No, they're in the casino celebrating. That they're thinking that we're. And there's this brilliant bit where he goes, not yet, Kameraden, not yet. And I thought that's my meme. That's my meme.
That I have the captain shouting "Schneller, schneller." Which and also now it all turns psychological, gentlemen, is a great line.
That's
which
good.
I must have seen that one around because it's one of those ones where when he said it, I recognised it immediately. I rather like. I think you could find, if people understood what it was, when they do the resupply in Vigo and they're meeting the supply ship, and they're this table full of food. This is the other thing I knew I remembered from seeing it in '99. And he's one of those. The captain there says, "It's not an easy life here." I feel I could find uses for that. Stiffest upper lip.
Well, I think James has sort of nailed this one. These are sort of traditional British war movie English stiff upper lips, just on German U-boat crew.
Yes,
right.
My favourite bit was when they're on the bottom, and I can't remember who it is, but one of them, they're sitting there. They cannot believe the boat is holding firm and it's not being crumpled by the boat. And he gets a report on, he's a long list of everything that's gone wrong, and he just goes, quite a mess. It's just, okay, you could not improve on the understatement. But I also think you mentioned the sort of the banquet, the feast in Vigo's scene. I thought what was brilliant about that was the fact that the captain shows the same self-control there that he does under the water. So he goes to this vast array of food, right? And unlike the second officer who goes and literally just starts shoving his gob with food, the captain just looks at this, with his hands still in his pockets. He's hardly said a word. And then he looks and he picks up a fig and he holds this thing And he says, and the captain of the ship says, yeah, it's a fresh fig. We got it from there. And he goes, yes, a fig. He said, I've never tasted a fig. And he slowly peels this thing back like that. And then he takes a small taste. This is a guy who's been on a boat for weeks, months. He hasn't tasted fresh food like that. And it's just amazing self-control. So clearly stiff upper lip. But I'm afraid I do have one person who does, I'm afraid, beat the captain.
Yeah, go on.
Which is during one of the depth charge attacks, when there's a slight gap between depth charges, and there's just literally and the boats are all over the place. There is a guy who is relieving himself into a. Now, I have performed similar bodily functions in a floating vessel that is going up and down like that, and it's not easy in the best of times to do it while you are under attack, while in a moment of extreme stress, and carry on just as the next explosions begin. To my mind, maybe stiffest upper lip is not the right category for this, but that for me that shows the most sort of
sang-froid.
Sang-froid. Just if you can do that when all around you are panicking, I think that shows a certain amount of cool.
My nomination was for the chief, who I think sort of you keep thinking you're going to hear something, you're going to hear what he learned on his phone call to his very ill wife. I kept thinking we're going to, at some point they were going to get a reveal that actually the night before they sailed he was told she died or something, and he's just been keeping this, and we never do. We know that she's very ill, and he's broadly keeping that in, and then he is the one who rescues them at the end. Ultimately, he is the one who makes it work, which actually I can't remember where I had it right. My best line, which is slightly sort of treads on it sort of goes with memes, but my nomination for best line is the captain afterwards saying, "You have to have good men." That's his and actually because he'd tried to put the chief ashore because as an act of mercy, because he knew exactly what was going to happen when they tried to go to Gibraltar. So he's tried sort of to save his friend's life, but in fact, he's not allowed to do that, and instead it's his friend who saves his life or saves all of their lives, because you can't imagine that anyone else on the boat could have achieved this feat of underwater emergency engineering to sort of to get the whole thing going and just to hold themselves together so well. So I think they all have. I mean, the captain's lip never really wobbles. He's the only one who never panics. I don't think the chief ever quite panics, but most of the younger men at some point or other, sort of somebody has to hit them and say, "Pull yourself together." But nastiest Nazi. Well, I mean, it's really only one Nazi in it. But who's the first officer who is sort of, and even we sense there's a moment where he basically stops wearing the proper uniform and sort of And
I guess we're going back to that question at the beginning of how accurate do we think this is? That you're right. It would be perfectly possible to watch this film and conclude from it that out of these 50 young men, male Germans, only one of them is actually a Nazi. Really, which I don't think is a fair reflection on where Germany was certainly in October 41.
Well, and also certainly sort of 19, 20-year-old Germans who would all have
been through the Hitler Youth and
massively indoctrinated. Yeah. You sort of get a little hint that Werner's a bit more of a believer than he lets on, I think, towards just.
Well, you get towards the end when they're waiting for the repair to happen. Werner, when Werner thinks they're still going to die, he starts quoting from certain sort of things he's been taught and indoctrinated about. Where I can't remember the precise words, but he says something like that we were told we were told we were going off to glory and sacrifice, and as you said, with no
all
women,
for the fatherland,
for the fatherland, and the glory and grandeur of reality. I was drunk on those words. Well, this is the reality. So there is that sense that yes, there was a time. They are aware. They've been through that process.
Yeah. Yeah, I do wonder whether, as Duncan says, whether this is more of a 1942 U-boat journey than a 1941 U-boat journey. But I mean, actually, have either of you read I can't remember. I've got it next door. The convoy battle book. It's HX231. It's this account by a Royal Naval officer who was commanding. It was his first command of commanding other ships, I think, and he is commanding the defense of convoy HX231, which is going from America to Britain, and he wrote it, I think, in the 70s, and he said basically because he wanted to understand what had happened in this battle because he had never understood. And at this point, he can go and he can read all of the ship's logs, not just our ship's logs, but the German ones. And there are still people alive that he can talk to. And actually, what you get reading that is that you still don't understand what's going on. That there are moments where sort of they thought they'd seen a submarine, but he can't find any submarine that says that it was in this place, or he can find a submarine saying that they'd sunk 3 ships in the convoy or whatever, but there was no sinking that night, and this kind of and it's sort of mad chaos back and forth, that just that nobody really knows in this war what's going on. And you've got your own little perspective of it, and I kept thinking about that during these scenes where, for instance, when they're on the bottom of Gibraltar, the Royal Navy will think, well, we sunk that one.
Yes.
And they won't be wrong.
Yeah.
They really had done all they could. And probably in the convoy battle, actually, that would have been reported. Basically, everyone over reports. You would have reported that as a sinking because it got pretty hairy. There's just the weird... The reality of this was that nobody ever quite understood what was happening to them, and you only ever see one perspective. And I sort of feel this film just captures that.
It does
incredibly well. It's Dan Buster's dog prize for the most problematic moment. Oh, actually, no, sorry. I've got another nasty Nazi. My other nomination for nasty Nazi is the resupply captain. He's not in there for long. But
yes, but deeply unpleasant character at the very least.
You really do want to smack him.
Yeah.
At the end of his scene. and actually that's where you get the really interesting question is how do they feel about sinking these ships and watching these sailors die? And there's a sort of hint that you're doing this. They feel bad about when the guys are, why are they still on the tanker? He hadn't realized they were still there, and so on. I find that psychologically plausible, but equally, torpedoed a tanker, an oil, hitting the fuel tanker was the big prize if you were a U-boat captain, right? And that thing goes up. What did you think was going to happen to the men on board?
It's an excellent scene that when they're ordered to back away, and
I think for me, the moment that captures that is actually not on the surface when they're watching the tanker go down, but it's actually when they're under the water and they're hearing the other ship go down. And somebody says, those are the bulkheads breaking, kind of thing. And the point is that at that point, they all suddenly realize that's what would happen to them if they were in a similar circumstance. So that's a sort of a moment where they empathize with the reality of that could happen to them, which is different to feeling sympathy for the people you've just attacked.
Yeah. I mean, this is, this is the reality. And actually, I think one of the reasons why I think people really think this is a great film is it doesn't shy away from the fact that the reality of the war is that you end up killing people who've who you've never met, who've done nothing to you, and in all sorts of weird asymmetric ways. So, I would you rather be a convoy tanker captain or a U-boat captain? Probably a U-boat captain. On the other hand, would you rather be a destroyer captain or a U-boat captain? Well, from this, maybe a destroyer captain has a better chance. And would you rather be an RAF Lancaster pilot or a civilian on the ground in Hamburg? It's an ugly, nasty business. But then, sorry, this is the resupply captain when he's sort of talking about the glory of it all.
Yes.
And you think, is it glorious though? And you sort of think maybe that Jürgen Prochnow not completely convinced that everything he's doing is glorious. As you say, maybe, the extent to which they really did think that. He's supposed to be an older captain. The guy he's based on sort of was a career naval officer.
Yeah.
So, Dan Buster's dog prize for the most problematic moment. I don't really have any.
No.
Go on.
I don't know. We are three blokes watching a film about blokes. I imagine there might be one or two women who think that kind of women slightly come off on the, they're not. Do you know what I mean? It's a very, very male film.
It's not a date movie. Mark Corrigan accepted.
Yeah.
But well, I suppose the thing is that the problematic moment is my sort of test is, if you were making this now, would you say, oh well, we're not having the brothel scene? And I think you could say, well, look, I don't know that we need quite as much of the brothel scene or whatever, but the idea that you would, in fact, they have remade Das Boot as a TV series, which I haven't watched, but and I think that does have much more sort of stuff on land. But
you can cut it down, but it's a hard cut to cut it entirely.
Yeah, and you sort of.
And it's not gratuitous.
Do we think that the soldiers weren't visiting brothels? So I don't know that it's. It's.
Would you have, if you made it these days, one of the officers spraying a soda fountain on the singer at the brothel, in the way he did? How can I put it like that?
Well, except that I sort of think I know exactly what you mean. I sort of think the point is supposed to be these, that these men are bores. They are horribly drunk, and they and it's all about them just thinking knowing they're likely never to come back. This might be the last, and they behave. They are behaving appallingly, but sort of that's supposed to be the point. That they're behaving appallingly. So I sort of, and I think it goes to his character that all the way through, he's the man, as you say, he's the one when they get to the buffet who has no self-control. That's where you learn who he is. Any other best lines? or did we cover all of those in memes?
I think we've covered the memes. I do like the sort of anti-Hitler speech when the other captain's getting his Knight's Cross. We've already touched on former apprentice painter, now the greatest strategist in history, and all of this. It's very nicely done. Yeah,
there's a slight sort of, you can feel the tension in the room at that moment as people think we're going to have to take this guy out and shoot him. Yeah. So that will be awkward. Yeah. You got anything, James?
Well, actually, it's also from Captain Thompson, the drunk. Any film that has the following line is a good film from my point of view. When he's been, the captain and the Werner are dragging him out of the luge where he's vomiting and sort of, almost losing consciousness. And they pick him up and he sort of gathers himself like that. And he's, completely off his face. And he says, can I use the F word?
I don't know. You can use, I can fix it.
I am not in the condition to Z Kyle. That's just a great line. It's just a great line in any film. And the thing is, he says that line in English as a German. So he's sort of, even in his drunkenness, he's being slightly sort of ironic, or but he just said it's a great line. Look, there are so many great lines. We've mentioned them all, haven't we?
Judgment at Nuremberg. Convoy raiding is not a war crime, Duncan.
No.
And indeed, it's sort of the Americans do it to the Japanese. The British have done it at various points. James's great
thinking of the
uncle did it.
materials.
You know,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
How much did they make up? Well, I mean,
It all seems very plausible, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. I know. I have no broadsword radio moments of implausibility.
The only ones I question, and I take your judgment as historians, is at the departure and the arrival. Did every departure and arrival have a band and a cheering crowd and waving dignitaries, or did they slip out at night to avoid, local fifth columnists reporting it to the Brits that the submarine?
That's a good. I mean, I did wonder that when I was watching it. Both of those questions. I thought, gosh, I wonder if this is normal, and also I wonder which of these people has got a transmitter in their attic.
Yeah.
But I don't know the answer to that question.
There were also a few odds and sods. There was a moment when the operator, using the hydrophone, with his headphones, with the sort of underwater sonar, he was still using it while they were going hard with their diesel engines on. He's not going to hear much in his ear if the submarine's diesel engine's going. There are also a couple of moments, and this is probably an editing thing, where they surfaced without checking.
Right.
I don't think you just surface sort of, well, let's just go up, sort of, I'll Saigon, and away we go. You stop, you put up a periscope, you check, you have a look, then so there are a few, but like kind of, those are sort of, naval pedants sort of points rather than anything.
Well, I'm not against a bit of naval pedantry. That's Duncan, is this the operation that changed the course of World War II?
What, the submarine war?
Yes.
I think the submarine war generally, it's hugely important, isn't it? No doubt about that. Winning the Battle of the Atlantic is a big moment for Britain. And what's interesting, and it's obvious the moment you give it a moment's thought, is why the submarine war in the Second World War is much harder fought than in the First World War. When you do get a very intense period of submarine warfare in the First World War. What makes it different in the Second is because the Germans have bases along the French Atlantic coast and Norway, which they don't have in the First. It fundamentally changed. If the German U-boat fleet is all putting to sea in the North Sea and has to get through either the Scapa Flow Gap or out in the Channel, most of them are going to get sighted. Whereas once you've got all of those bases like La Rochelle, then suddenly you've got direct access into the Atlantic.
Yeah, I mean, could it have gone the other way? There's a Payson O'Brien, Phillips O'Brien.
He's got one of his lovely counterintuitive arguments.
Yes,
here,
his counterintuitive argument, because the argument is that breaking the Enigma shortened the war partly because it helped us to avoid the German submarine fleets. But his argument is that by 1944, the Allies ought to be trying to find the German submarine fleets, because when they find the German submarines, they sink them, and which is, it sort of feels. That feels like the Das Boot experience. So, I mean, the Simon Parkin book, A Game of Birds and Wolves, which I know you have because I gave it to you for Christmas.
Very good indeed.
I don't know if you've read it yet.
But... I have, and very good. But I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? By the second half of the war, the system works. The Royal Navy knows how to sink submarines. It takes a bit of toing and froing to get there. Something I was talking about the other day, in both wars, there is a bit of resistance at times to instituting a convoy system, and a convoy system might sound really obvious, but a convoy system has downsides as well. Because if you've got, ports used to unloading one or two ships at a time, and you move to a system where suddenly, dozens, it really, really slows down the unloading of stuff when you've got these convoys arriving rather than individual ships. In both wars, there is a period when we think, actually, take the losses. The not disrupting unloading times is worth it, and in both wars we change our minds quite quickly.
The loading and unloading of ships is the subject of a fantastic non-fiction book called The Box.
Yes, it used to be really hard before containers.
Yeah, which is basically all about the development of the container ship, and what it explains to you is that the sort of in the on the waterfront world, it used to take a week or 2 weeks to unload a merchant ship, because you had to go on and take every box off by hand, which is why being in a merchant navy was sort of quite jolly, because you'd spend all this time on shore leave, whereas now you turn up in a port in Baltimore and the whole thing is
unloaded, cranes, off come the boxes,
and you're off again. These are, I mean, book recommendations. If you like this podcast, you'll like a 400-page book about container freight. I promise you. Worth dying for. How does this film stand up, James?
I think it stands up admirably. I think the fact that we're still watching it and it still grips us over 3.5 hours, if not necessarily the full 5 hours, and the fact that it's I love the fact that it's just so random at times. There are just kind of odd little scenes where you get two members of the crew talking about, tying different bits of hair from their different parts of their anatomy. And so, do you know what I mean? I mean, like, kind of how that survived the edit, I don't know, but it sort of does. But the point is that, if you know anything about sort of, young men, they have these odd conversations of random weirdness while they're picking their nose and flicking bogies at each other, which we see in this film.
Yes.
And so there's a sort of a reality to it that you can sort of think, well, if that bit, I recognize that bit, then maybe the rest of the film, the portrayal of submarine life is true, because obviously, unless you've been through it, you don't. But if you look at a lot of the websites, a lot of ex-submariners all say this is their favorite film because it's the one that comes closest to capturing the claustrophobia and the sense of containment and pressure and smell, etc. That is as true today in submarines as it was then.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one surviving, I think, German U-boat, and it's in America. But
Chicago,
if you're in Britain, you can go to Chatham Docks and you can get on a British, just post-war submarine, I think. And the main thing you think is, blimey, this is tiny. It's tiny. And I mean, there's so little space, and then they tell you how big the crew was, and you just, I'm not sure you can actually fit all of those people.
But also, it reminds you that kind of, why you moved the men to one end of the boat to submerge, because their weight made a huge difference. A huge difference. I mean, I've been on boats, on sailing boats where there's not much breeze. And so if you get all the crew to go to one side of the boat, it heels the boat so that the sail, the integral weight of the sail forms its own shape, so that what little wind you've got doesn't have to be wasted forming that shape. And so you get a little bit of drive and lift off the sail, right? So, even on those boats, moving weight around matters. But the impact of having, 20 heavy guys just go right to the bow means, a huge impact. But you're right, the smallness is just horrific.
James, were you on, I don't think you were, the 2006 Blair trip to Australia? I don't think that.
I don't think I was.
We did Australia, New Zealand, and Indonesia. And I can't remember who did it for the B. It might have been. But what I remember most about that trip was because they had put so much fuel in the plane because they were going to fly direct from Brussels to Melbourne, which was the furthest a 747 had ever flown with passengers. Yeah. And as we're sitting on the runway about to take off, there's this sort of pause, and then everyone from Downing Street, all the Downing Street staff, got up and ran to the back of the plane on the instructions of the pilot to rebalance the plane for takeoff. And we the press, they'd obviously decided we couldn't be trusted to to successfully move to different seats, but all the civil servants and the protection people and so on all ran and sat right at the back of the plane so that the plane would be balanced on takeoff, which is the only time I've seen anything quite like this. Duncan, what did you think of it?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's maybe the fourth time I've seen it. I've said before, I think the ideal length for a film is about 100 minutes or less. The fact that I've seen this several times and continue to enjoy it when it is well in excess of 100 minutes, I think is testimony to what a good film it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I think it captures as well this sort of the long. I mean, it goes to what you were saying, James. The long periods of tedium, in between things very exciting happening, and I think that's why you have to have those scenes where they're all just sitting around, sort of picking up mildew out of loaves or whatever, because in fact, you think about this sort of, they're supposed to have spent sort of a couple of months at sea at this point, and they fire, I think, 3 torpedoes, maybe they fire 4 torpedoes the whole time. And And in fact, you look through the logs of the ships, and you go, yeah, that's sort of representative. So there's an awful lot of time where they're not sighting on convoy shipping, and they are just sort of sailing around and feeling seasick and sick of each other's company, and so on and so forth. No, I think it's absolutely magnificent, and so glad that you picked it. So thanks very much for joining us, James Landale.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was great chat.
And thanks as ever, Duncan.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for listening. Next week, we're going from the Atlantic to the driest place on Earth as we watch Billy Wilder's 5 Graves to Cairo, which is available for people who are struggling to find it on the Internet Archive. If you're enjoying the show, do please tell your friends, leave a review, and drop us a line at warmovietheatre@gmail.com.